Check, check. Okay, so here's the belt pack. You can just stick this in a pocket or anywhere that you like, or you can clip it to a your waistband if you'd like.
Do that.
Okay, and then I will get this hooked up to you if that's okay.
Yeah, do that.
All right, let's see. Go ahead and I'm just gonna stick it on your. Is this okay on your collar right
Yeah,
here?
that's fine.
Okay. If you'd like to, what we can do is we can have it kind of hide if you want.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea. The old TV days. Because, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Congratulations on your appointment from January 11th.
January 1st.
January 1st as a fellow at the Institute of Public Policy.
Institute for Policy Studies.
Policy Studies. Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And welcome. It's over to you.
Thank you so much. And then, oh, Gabe, where's the little clicker? Is this it? This is it. Oops. Oh, but you know what? I need to set up the, Gabe? Gabe, can you put up the PPT for me? Yes. And, okay, I need my little.
Is John around? John?
I think that Deborah did. She was supposed to. Oh, yeah, that's it.
Oh, man. Yes, yeah,
Yes, that's it. Perfect. Perfect. And then let me just make sure that the clicker
Just
works.
test it out.
Okay, great.
Do you, for live stream, what do they do? Here or
Oh,
there?
yeah. Where should I be for the live
Here
stream?
or there for live stream?
Right here is okay.
Which fine
And then
for-
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Should I use the mic? Right here.
You can use either one.
Oh, okay. Oh my God, I have so many things.
Okay.
Oh, and also there's a wireless. Oh, there is a wireless mic. Oh, could I do that too? Absolutely. Okay. Sorry, Gabe, I have another device.
Too many.
Oh my God, and I am so techie illiterate here, so let's see. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to be two devices here. Okay, just turn this. You can hear that, right?
That's right.
Okay, great. Oh, how was that? Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, I just landed, and thanks to Reverend Martin, I got to lay down horizontally for about an hour and a half. So, good thing I typed up my speech because I'm a half person kind of at this moment. But I just want to thank you all for gathering to commemorate our beloved Reverend Syngman Rhee. And he would always joke about how he was the other Syngman Rhee. And I always enjoyed that joke because I actually came from Honolulu, Hawaii, which is actually the place that Reverend, or not Reverend, but the other Syngman Rhee fled to after he was overthrown. And sometimes that place can be a complicated place to do my Korea peace activism.
because that kind of conservatism has continued to flourish in Honolulu. And so I always feel so grateful to be among peace-loving, justice-loving community like this. So thank you for warmly welcoming me and for your patience with my frenetic schedule, but I'm just really honored to be with you. I also was sharing with Reverend Martin that I watched overnight a new documentary film about Martin Luther King Jr. And I just, as I shared yesterday, Reverend Rhee had shared with me how he had marched with MLK Jr. and how much that experience transformed him. And I just, I grew up Buddhist. My parents are both Buddhist, long lineage of actually Buddhism in my family. And in fact, my father, my parents have since passed away, but after the war, my father helped rebuild a Buddhist temple outside of Seoul in the Bukhansan Mountains. And I don't know, the power of just the way that MLK Jr., he was the son of a pastor, but so much what guided his courage and conviction was his spirituality. And so I just feel very honored to be among this community of people that are very driven by their spirituality. And so thank you so much for warmly welcoming me. And today, my talk is a little bit different from yesterday, which is more the... Yes, I can turn it up a little bit. I think I can. Let's see. I might need Gabe's help. Here we go. Gabe. Okay, thank you, Gabe. Do you know how I turn up the volume a little bit?
Yeah, that's so do you only have that one on right now? I'm gonna go ahead and put this one on. So this one.
Testing.
Oopsie.
There's this thing that says gain. I don't know if that...
Right, so this is actually going to be your mic for the house. So you have a separate microphone
got
for the
it.
live stream.
Okay.
So that's why you're
Oh, so I should just use this?
Yeah, just go ahead and use that.
Okay. Let me undo this then, unless you need me.
So this one's going to be so we have to do two. So we have one for the live stream, and then that one is going to be going for the house. So, sorry about that.
But I have this one for the live stream.
Oh, so you do have another one for the live
Yeah,
stream.
so let me take this one.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Good thing we
If
have
you
them.
want to use a handheld, you can do either way, but it's...
I mean, I would prefer the lapel because I'm going to be doing this and this, but if that's not possible, I'll just do this.
Let me get the other wire from you, just if we're going to do that. That one right there.
Okay. You want me to take this one off?
Oh, no, you're good. You can just leave it on.
Okay.
I'll just take the other.
Oh, check this thing.
Yeah, I'm just going to replace this one.
Okay.
Just because it's kind of doing some weird things.
Okay. The political context, which, based on speaking with Reverend Martin on the way here, everybody's more informed than I am. But this talk is more a little personal journey and a little bit about the strategies that we've used at Women Cross DMZ in building a women-led peace movement to finally end the Korean War. And I learned from Reverend Martin also that the union here also has not just the kind of international program, but a womanist and a social justice focused program. And that feels to me like I am home. So without further ado, let me start my presentation, which I'm calling Peace in Korea and Peace in Our World, the Role of Civil Society and Peace Movements to Realize Peace. So I'm just deeply honored to be with you on this 10th anniversary of Reverend Rhee's passing. He touched so many people's lives, and his example as a peace builder, bridge builder, but also through his own journey with reconciliation is truly remarkable. So I'm deeply honored to be here to both celebrate and honor his legacy, but also continue walking the path that Reverend Rhee helped light and trailblaze. Yesterday and today, I think we all should give a round of applause to the South Korean democracy movement for succeeding in finally achieving the arrest of President Yoon. I think that is, can we just give a moment and congratulate them? Because that, yes, I know. Because I think that it's a shining light and a model and a beacon of hope of what people can do to defend democracy. So at a time when militarism, climate change, and rising authoritarianism threaten our very existence, it gives me great hope to be here with you, with faith leaders who will help build the world we want to live in and to deserve to live in. Today I want to share with you my journey, the work that we have done as a women's peace organization to help end this forever war, and some thoughts on how we can build a world where everyone feels safe, secure, and free. I want to start, there we go, sharing a little bit about my life, which very much shaped why I devoted my life to achieving peace on the Rhee Peninsula. Here is me, I think I was one. I was born the youngest of 10 children in Seoul, South Korea, to elderly parents born during Japan's colonial occupation of Korea. My mother actually bore 13 children, but 3 boys died because of the poverty that afflicted so many Koreans post-war. So I grew up with 8 sisters and 1 brother. Given how patriarchal Korean culture can be, where the birth of sons are celebrated, many viewed our family as an Asian tragedy. But all I witnessed growing up was the power of women in my family. In 1976, when I was 3, after my eldest sister married an American military officer, our family immigrated to the US. And because my parents were so old and we were so poor, I moved around quite a bit from home to home, year to year, attending too many public schools before I finally went to college, which was nothing short of a miracle. I share this because I think it's so important to know. I know we don't have a younger generation, but it's so important to remember that no matter how hard of the circumstances you faced, we can always change the course of our life and contribute to building a more just and peaceful world. I know that Reverend Rhee also modeled that. So for most of my 20s, I worked on social justice issues in the US with poor and working class communities of color, including in Washington, D.C., with the group called Bread for the City and Zacchaeus Free Clinic, with Native American communities on the Navajo Reservation in the Southwest, and with groups along the US-Mexico border providing sanctuary to migrants. These experiences helped me understand how broader systems of militarism, capitalism, and racism underlie so many of our world's problems, including my own. It wasn't until my late 20s, when I was a graduate student at Georgetown, that I finally learned about the singular trauma that has shaped the life of every Korean, the Korean War. Robert Gallucci, the Clinton administration's chief negotiator during the North Korean nuclear crisis, came to speak at our class at the School of Foreign Service. He told us about that day at the Oval Office in 2004, when they were planning a preemptive strike on North Korea's nuclear reactor, Yongbyon. Does anybody remember that? Yeah, I know, I love the older generation in the room. But their war plans were interrupted by someone named President Jimmy Carter, who called to inform them that he was heading to Pyongyang with the CNN camera crew to meet Kim Il-sung. the leader of North Korea. And in fact, I can probably venture to say that Reverend Rhee and some other Korean American pastors were among the group that urged President Carter to do that. That is the extraordinary behind the scenes story. So the two leaders met. I think I might have had a picture. The two leaders met and outlined the 1994 agreed framework, which froze North Korea's nuclear program and began a diplomatic process between the two countries. By the end of the Clinton administration, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright had traveled to Pyongyang and met Kim Jong-il, and the second most senior North Korean official visited the White House. It seemed we were on the precipice of finally ending the Korean War. Unfortunately, the Democratic candidate Al Gore lost to Republican George W. Bush, who not only ended the agreed framework, but then placed North Korea on its quote-unquote axis of evil with Iran and Iraq. Instead of denuclearization, what a hawkish US policy led to was the opposite, a nuclear-armed North Korea that has since tested 6 nuclear weapons, developed enough nuclear material to produce 50 nuclear weapons, and launched hundreds of missiles that can theoretically strike the US continent. In 2003, as the US invasion of Iraq took place, many feared that North Korea would be next. Korean Americans joined millions on the streets to protest the Iraq War, but that didn't feel sufficient. I felt I needed to go to North Korea. So in 2004, I went on a peace delegation where I learned about the impact of the ongoing war on their lives. I have since, and actually not since 2015, largely due to the ban, I've since traveled extensively throughout North Korea, from Nampo on the west and Wonsan on the east, north to Mapektu and south to Kaesong, to cooperative farms in North and South Hwanghae, and to the oldest Korean temple in Mount Myohang. I've visited historic sites, schools, factories, maternity hospitals, and even ended up visiting the emergency room with my sick 22-month-old daughter, Jeju. I'm going to pause here to just share this story. So this is Jeju when she was 22 months, and these are the women that were at the guest house. And I don't know, do you guys know the story about how she ended up in the emergency room? Reverend Chung, do you know this story? You do a little bit? Okay. I think I'm going to share it right now because we have some time. But when I had the dream, which I'll talk about in a minute, that was in 2009. And then in 2013, when the 5 New Zealanders crossed the DMZ by motorbike, and then I contacted Peter Wilson. He's with the Friendship Group in New Zealand, and he told me how he did it. Well, I contacted the DPRK mission to the UN, and at the time, many of the Korean American pastors probably remember him. His name was Pak Chol. He was the counselor at the UN mission. Very tall, spoke with a British English accent, very witty, very funny. And it turned out that Pak Chol, I had met him in 2004 when I went on the peace delegation. He was the lead kind of welcoming and hosting the overseas Korean delegation. And so I deeply connected with Pak Chol then. And it turned out that Pak Chol was the interpreter for the international delegation in 1989 when there was the Youth World Peace Summit in Pyongyang. And so he had this long history of knowing, and that was when Im Soo-kyung crossed the DMZ in 1989, the young college student. And so I think he had a soft place in his heart for obviously for peace activism, but I think for women and the role of women in ending wars. And so it turned out that when I had this idea to go to do the DMZ crossing with women, Pak Chol was the counselor at the UN mission, which was, I think in many ways,
it was a blessing from God. It was, I mean, how could the universe be so perfectly aligned that here was the person at the UN mission that I had a personal connection with and who had this long history of supporting these kind of big international peace gatherings. And so Pak Chol, I told him this idea, and I still have the email exchange with him. He said, "It's a crazy idea, Christine." But he said, or he always called me Anhunhi, and he said, "But why don't you send me a concept note, and I will send it to Pyongyang." And I'm sure he did his whatever fixing and then sent it. And then he emailed me back and said, "We got the green light. They want you to come to pitch the idea to them." And so I was so excited. And so I went, I gathered my stuff, I raised a little bit of money, and Haejung Park, who is a long friend of mine and also has done several documentary films about North Korea, I asked her to join me, and so we were all ready to go. And I had just, I mean, this is, you can see she's still a small child. I had just moved from California to Hawaii, and my then husband was a new faculty member. He was a new young professor. And you can imagine, those of you that are professors, the incredible workload you have of coming up with coursework for 3 classes. And so a few weeks before we were set to go in February, he got very sick. And you know, when he was sick, he was like helpless. And then I thought, oh gosh, if she's sick, or if he gets sick again, the whole family will be helpless. So I had the crazy idea, I think I'm gonna ask if I could bring Jeju with me to North Korea. And plus, sorry for the men, a little TMI, but I was still breastfeeding. And I was like, I don't think I can wean her in this amount of time. So I wrote to Pak Chol and I said, would it be possible to bring Jeju with me? And he wrote me right back and he said, absolutely, we will give her a visa. And even more, we will provide childcare when you have to meet with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I thought, this is the North Korea we never hear of. We only hear the vilification of that country and that government, but that is a beautiful side of being a part of a socialist country like that, where they really want to make sure that mothers are taken care of. And so we set off to Pyongyang. And of course, you may remember, for those of you that have gone, you have to stop in Beijing. You have to get your visa from the mission, from the embassy there. You have to get your Air Koryo tickets, and there's only a few flights. This was way back then, 2014. You had to, and of course, the day that we landed in Beijing, you could scarcely know that you had landed because it was so smoggy. Like the air was so thick. And so the government had warned that day to not allow your children to go play outside because the smog was so bad. And so of course, little Jeju develops a terrible cough. And I'm trying everything to help her recover from this, and she doesn't have fever, but she's just coughing a lot. So Haejung and I are like, oh, should we go to North Korea or not? Because, I mean, once you're there, you're there. And so we just made the decision, we're gonna go. And so we got to Pyongyang, we get to the guest house, and you know, they always have a very lavish meal to warmly welcome you. And so we're eating, and poor Jeju is like vomiting. And then we go into the guest room afterwards, and I can't sleep because this poor child is like, her breathing is so labored. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So what do? I turn on all the hot water in the bathroom. And you know, in North Korea, electricity shortages all the time. And so finally somebody knocks on the door because I'm using all their hot water, all their electricity. And so, you know, I opened the door and I said, oh, 미안한데요, 병원에 가야 돼요. Which is, oh my God, excuse me, but I think we need to go to the hospital. And in a flash, he said, absolutely. And, they gathered everything. We got into the minivan, and we drove, like he sped through the streets of Pyongyang. And, everybody sees that kind of exaggerated image of the satellite image of Northeast Asia, and there's just that black hole, which is North Korea. There's China, it's all lit up, and South Korea is all lit up, and Japan is all lit up, and then North Korea is right there. I mean, it's a little exaggerated, we know, but it felt like that when we were driving through the streets. I mean, there was just no lights on. It was pitch black. And so we pull up in front of the Friendship Hospital, which is the hospital that foreigners go to, and it was empty. I mean, it was freezing. And a doctor and a nurse who stay there came out to greet us, and they rushed us down the hallway. They took us to the doctor's office, which was the only room in that hospital that was heated. And he puts on his stethoscope, he's asking me questions, and he puts the stethoscope on her back to listen to her breathing. And what happens at that moment? The electricity goes out. And I just, in that moment of darkness and quiet and stillness, I just was bawling because I thought, oh gosh, I'm here in the service of peace, but I'm gonna kill my daughter. But also I was crying for the suffering of the North Korean people. Why do they have to live that way? So that's a little bit of the backstory, and I'll just, before I proceed with my presentation, it was the next morning that was the meeting with the 3 committees. I mean, it was really mostly the International Committee for Solidarity with the World's People that we had to meet with. And it was, 4 men with their Kim Il-sung pins, and here I was like right now, bags under my eyes, and did not sleep. And I brought my little baby with me. And I think something about that moment of seeing this haggard mother with her child, and just I think all the walls that we put up between each other, it came down. They had so much empathy for me, and I think that they could really genuinely feel my love, my compassion, my true commitment to seeing an end to this war. And so that completely changed the conversation that day. And it was at the end of that meeting, they said, okay, we will grant you the right to cross the DMZ and to hold a Women's Peace Symposium. And I mean, the cost was high, but I thought, oh, little Jeju really helped. Her first peace act. So thank you for letting me share that story, but I think it really hits home the power of women and women and children in doing this peace work. So, from my numerous visits, I've learned that North Koreans are just like us. They have families, they have hopes, they have dreams, and like all of us, they just want to live in peace. But they also live in a society that is constantly reminding them of the Korean War. From the political posters throughout the country to the daily reminder that they must unite behind their leader to prevent regime change. Unfortunately, this isn't propaganda or mere conspiracy theory. The US and South Korea regularly conduct joint war drills in which they rehearse O-Plan 5029 for regime change. In fact, the 300 assassins, I mentioned this yesterday, that were sent, deployed by Yoon to the National Assembly were those very elite military officers who regularly rehearse regime change. So North Koreans have recently watched the US invade and overthrow leaders in Iraq, Libya, and they have their own memory of the Korean War, where 80% of North Korean cities were obliterated and 1 in 4 family members were killed. On a daily basis, North Koreans must live with being the most sanctioned country in the world, according to a Korea Peace Now report by a multidisciplinary panel of experts, sanctions against North Korea contributed to more than 4,000 civilian deaths in 2018 due to a lack of access to humanitarian assistance. Sanctions also target North Korea's, excuse me, I am gonna have to blow my nose. I'm sorry, this is such an unpolished speaker here, but. Ayam, were you grabbing a tissue for me? I thought I brought a. Thank you so much. I thought I brought one of these tissue packets. Okay, leave it to the women. Okay, thank you. Oh, really? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, and apologies for that. Oh, thank you. So this is a report that we did in 2018 about the sanctions and how they target not just North Korean civilian economy and harm the most vulnerable, working class families, particularly children and seniors living in remote areas with restricted access to medical supplies, food, and fuel for cooking and heating. And you can imagine, since COVID, the country has been locked down, and I imagine the conditions are far, far worse. Traveling throughout North Korea and listening to North Koreans about the devastating impact of the unresolved Korean War on their lives, and reading hundreds of UN reports. There are 4,000 UN reports, actually, from various agencies from field experts, from being on the ground. And meeting and learning from humanitarian aid experts have helped informed my understanding of the conditions in North Korea and the urgency to end the war to improve it. But my understanding of the Korean War wouldn't be complete without traveling extensively throughout South Korea, or have also seen how much the unresolved war still impacts divided families, thwarts democracy, and prevents the country from investing in a more just society. In 2006, I witnessed one of the most heartbreaking struggles that forever changed my understanding of this war. I traveled to Pyeongtaek, which is 50 miles south of Seoul, where farmers were resisting the expansion of US Camp Humphreys military base. They used nonviolent tactics to save their rice fields, which their families had cultivated for generations. Grandmothers tied themselves to the roofs of their homes to prevent them from being bulldozed. After holding a candlelight vigil for 800 days, they lost their land, which has now become part of the world's largest military base, spanning 3,500 acres, which is equivalent to 4 New York Central Parks. It so deeply impacted me that instead of valuing those who grow food to sustain us and steward the land and water, we prioritized a militarized vision of security that would only lead to more violence, death, and destruction of sentient and non-sentient beings in life. As a Korean American, I couldn't close my eyes or turn away. And this is why I have devoted my life to ending the Korean War, following in the footsteps of generations of courageous peace activists who have been killed, imprisoned, tortured, and stigmatized for believing that peace was not only possible, but the only solution. As a Korean American, I feel especially responsible to pressure my government, the United States, to bring closure to this war, because the US is a signatory to the 1953 armistice. It still has 28,500 troops on the Korean Peninsula and has wartime operational control over South Korea's military. It was the US, after all, that divided the Korean Peninsula without consulting a single Korean, dropped 635,000 tons of bombs and 32,500 tons of napalm during the Korean War, which was so devastating that just 1 year into the war, U.S. Major General Emmett O'Donnell testified before the Senate, quote, "There are no more targets in Korea," end quote. Not only did the Korean War impact all Korean people, it forever changed us here in the United States. According to University of Chicago historian Bruce Cummings, the war was, quote, "the occasion for transforming the United States into a very different country than it had ever been before, one with hundreds of permanent military bases abroad, a large standing army, and a permanent national security state at home," end quote. Although the Korean War quadrupled the US military spending and inaugurated the US military-industrial complex, it is still, quote, "the forgotten war," end quote. So how do you end a so-called forgotten war that has been systematically erased and dehistoricized? It sounds surreal, but almost a decade ago, as many of you have watched in the documentary film Crossings, we crossed the DMZ, that very Kaesong Road that North Korea blew up, with 29 peacemakers calling for a peace agreement, the reunion of separated families, and women's leadership in peace building. It was the 70th anniversary of Korea's division, and we needed to do a bold action that would shake the world. We walked with 10,000 Korean women on both sides of the DMZ, on the streets of Pyongyang, Kaesong, Paju, and we held women's peace symposiums in both Pyongyang and in Seoul, where we heard from Korean women how the unresolved war still impacts their lives. Many of you may wonder, how on earth did she do this? Well, the idea of the DMZ crossing was born from a dream I had in 2009, when the two Koreas were similarly at a dangerous impasse. I was working at the Global Fund for Women in San Francisco, and we had just screened the film, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, about how Liberian women crossed Christian and Muslim religious lines and worked to end the 17-year-old civil war. It was so inspiring to see the power of women, and it planted a seed in me. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night, turned on my computer, and read an article in the New York Times about the flooding of the Imjin River, which flows through the heart of the Korean Peninsula. Countless songs and poems have been written about Imjingang, why birds can fly over this river, but humans cannot see their loved ones. Well, North Korea allegedly lifted the floodgates without telling South Korea to prevent their farms from flooding. But with the hot wire shut down between the two Koreas, and without a warning, about a dozen people drowned, including a father and his son fishing in the morning dawn. I recall reading this and thinking how absurd it was that the two Korean leaders wouldn't communicate, and as a result, people died. I was so angry as I fell asleep, but then I had this dream. I was wading in the river at the crack of dawn, and there was this glow of light flowing down the river. Soon that light morphed into people, into families being reunited. We've all seen these images of family reunions, of elderly Koreans embracing their siblings after decades of being apart, like Reverend Rhee, who in 1978 finally went to go be reunited with his sisters. It is both beautiful and heart-wrenching. I felt compelled to keep going up the river to find the source of the light, and that's when I came to the source, which was a circle of women. They were stirring a thick black liquid that they then poured into little vessels that then flowed down the river and became the light. I woke up at that moment and I said to my husband, I know who will end the war. Women will end the war. To which he looked at me and gave me this look as if I was a little crazy. But then I asked myself, how will women end this war? How have Korean women, separated by the militarized, man-made border, met and worked to end this longest of conflicts? So through a fellowship at the University of Michigan, I conducted oral history interviews with South Korean women peace activists, and I learned that the first meeting of North and South Korean women took place in 1991 in Tokyo, after a member of the Japanese Diet responded to a South Korean woman's plea that the Korean War was at the root of the arms race in East Asia. I was stunned to learn that it was a Japanese woman who helped convene the first meeting of North and South Korean women over 40 years after the war. It made me realize that there was a role for those of us outside of the Korean Peninsula, especially in dangerous times of impasse between the two countries. As you can imagine, crossing the DMZ was not easy. We had to negotiate with North Korean, South Korean, and US governments, as well as with the UN command, the US forces in Korea, and at a time when there was simply no communication between the two sides. Furthermore, the conservative South Korean government at the time, Park Geun-hye, made it dangerous for South Korean peace activists to work with us. The Korean War era national security law is still in effect in South Korea, which has been used now even by Yoon, to repress activists fighting for labor rights, democracy, and peace, labeling them pro-North Korean and communists, and threatening to fine and arrest them. And in fact, he did that a lot in the last 2 years. But that didn't stop the brave South Korean women who risked arrest, nor the international women, including our dear A-young here, who is here with us today. We faced a hostile media and a misogynistic foreign policy establishment. They called us handmaidens, apologists, naive, even though our delegation included Nobel Peace Laureates who had halted civil wars, a former US Army colonel and diplomat, human rights lawyers, a humanitarian aid worker who ran the DPRK Red Cross for 6 years. That was an impressive and formidable and experienced peace delegation. We crossed the DMZ as a symbolic act of challenging the entrenched war, to shine a light on Korea's division, and to remind the international community, especially Americans, of our responsibility to help bring closure to this forever war. Here are some of the images from our crossing. On the left is in Kaesong. These are actually all from Kaesong. And this was a beautiful moment, as you may remember in the film, when we were stitching together the jogakbo, the quilt. We had prepared 4 quadrants, and we were stitching it with the North Korean women's. And I do have a funny story because the person that was overseeing the whole North Korean trip was a guy who is dear to me, Mr. Oh Ryong-il. And I had asked Mr. Oh, the delegation, we've been practicing singing 우리의 소원은 통일, which is our hope is for reunification. And I said, can we sing this at the end of the symposium? And he said, oh, Miss An, 시간이 없어요. We don't have time. And I just thought, oh, this man, he doesn't understand the power of this beautiful women's moment. But you know what? After the symposium and during the quilt stitching ceremony, the North Korean women, organically broke out in song. And it was one of those really powerful moments. And in fact, the AP camera guy, Raphael, I don't think he's still based there, especially during COVID. A lot of the international people left. And I think the AP bureau office has since closed. But he recorded that, and he told me later, he said, it reminded him of that very moment during the New York Philharmonic, when you remember that the North Korean musicians performed with the New York Philharmonic, and just the kind of moment of hope and love that just filled the room. So since our DMZ crossing, so here's us when we crossed into South Korea in Paju. So since our crossing, Women Cross DMZ, our small but mighty feminist peace organization set out to change the narrative of the forgotten war and to shine a light on US responsibility. We've brought our message to peace, to the streets, to the halls of Congress, and to the White House and State Department, and to the UN. We spread our message in the pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC, to college campuses, churches, temples, community centers around the world. And we've repeatedly shown that the US's insistence on denuclearization first and peace later has not only failed, it has exacerbated the crisis. We've argued that a peace-first approach is key to de-escalating the nuclear crisis, to make space for a negotiated resolution to the war, instituting trust building and reconciliation measures, and ultimately normalized relations. We've produced 3 major reports on the gendered impact of sanctions, the case for a peace agreement, and transforming the US-China rivalry towards cooperation on the Korean Peninsula. And these reports have been widely covered by the media, including the Wall Street Journal, and I even received an angry phone call from Trump's former North Korean envoy, Stephen Biegun, which showed us that we were making an impact. These are all available on the KoreaPeaceNow.org website, and they are used widely by the peace movement. We've also brought women peacemakers together at key times. In 2016, after North Korea conducted its last nuclear test, we brought 6 North Korean women to Indonesia for a meeting. In 2017, at the height of Fire and Fury, we convened 20 women in Vancouver to urge the foreign ministers that had gathered to pursue peace with North Korea and include women in the peace process. And in 2018, after the Panmunjom summit between Kim and Moon, we brought 25 women peacemakers together to call on Trump to meet Kim. And in December 2018, we convened the first ever Northeast Asia Women Peace and Security Roundtable with women peacemakers from North Korea, South Korea, US, Japan, Russia, China, and Canada. Such meetings today seem implausible given the conflicts in Europe and the Middle East and the new Cold War, but they are more urgent and needed than ever. And year after year, we walked and talked with hundreds of women in South Korea to remind ourselves of the importance of civil society, especially women, to help bring closure to this war. In 2019, we launched the Korea Peace Now campaign with the Nobel Women's Initiative, WILP, which is the oldest women's peace organization, and a coalition of South Korean women's groups. We brought South Korean women peace activists and parliamentarians to meet with US congressional representatives and activists. And this paved the way in 2019 for a California Congressman, Rhee, to draft the first ever congressional resolution to end the Korean War. This resolution has since become the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, which calls for urgent diplomacy in pursuit of a binding peace agreement, the establishment of liaison offices, and a review of the travel restrictions that Trump put into effect. And thanks to hundreds of grassroots activists, including many of you, the last bill got 54, largest ever, members of Congress to co-sponsor the bill. And although we are still far from passing such a bill, it's an important tool to mobilize our grassroots base, to educate Americans, and to build the political will in Congress to pressure the administration to change their approach to North Korea. Thanks to hundreds of activists, volunteers, and donors, including many of you here, we've built a multi-generational, multiracial, transnational grassroots movement that understands the urgency of ending the Korean War. Our grassroots members organize meetings, they write op-eds and letters to the editor, they attend town halls and meet with their reps to share stories about how the unresolved Korean War impacts them and why a peace-first approach would be more effective than the failed strategies of military provocation, sanctions, and isolation. This is a people-powered movement that is democratizing US foreign policy, and one day, I believe, will end this war. A major indicator that we've changed the narrative on the Korean War is what experts in the military, human rights field, and nuclear disarmament field say about our impact, which I believe is a testament to the big tent we've built and our effective inside-outside strategy. The first on the left is Dan Leaf. He says, as a 2-war combat veteran who served 4 years in the Republic of Korea And as the former deputy commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, I believe Congress must act now to push for the end of America's longest war, reduce the risk of nuclear catastrophe, and set the conditions for peace. He contacted me out of the blue in Honolulu, and I was really afraid to meet him because I thought, oh gosh, really? But Ann Wright, the U.S. Army colonel, said, you gotta meet him. And in that first meeting, it was a meeting of the minds. And so after that, I said, Dan, have you written an op-ed about what you believe? And he said, no, I've only written this one essay for the Oslo Peace Forum. And so he went home and he drafted an op-ed, and we helped edit it, and I pitched it for him to the New York Times. And so the op-ed says, I know how nuclear war is waged. It's time for peace with North Korea. Like, that is a huge deal to have the former commander of PACOM say that. And when it was finally published, he emailed me and said, Christine, 20 years ago, I was the senior pilot to bomb Baghdad. I am so happy now to be working for peace. So that was Dan Leaf. The second person that is Thomas Quintana. And actually, thanks to Young, she's kind of our Thomas Quintana emissary diplomat. But we really engaged him, and it was remarkable to see him. He stepped down after his 6-year term, but he really made a big turnaround, and he has come around since to be a strong proponent for peace as a key step towards improving human rights. Because, oftentimes the two fields can be very divided, right? And he really came to understand the importance, and he said, listen to these women. And then the last is John Carl Baker. The Plowshares Fund is the nation's largest nuclear disarmament foundation, and it's a big deal in the nuclear disarmament field, which has long held this paradigm that the only way to achieve North Korea's denuclearization is through pressure. And so it was we helped them cross a big moment. I remember the former president, his name is Joe Cirincione. Many of you probably have seen him on CNN and stuff, but I remember the moment that they had convened a call after the Panmunjom Summit in 2018. And these are these calls, conference calls. I don't think we were using Zoom then. And so everyone's anonymous, and they're mostly, the white men in the nuclear disarmament field. And they were talking about the Panmunjom Summit, this declaration that North and South Korea are no longer at war. What does that mean? And I remember chiming in and saying, well, don't you think peace? What about advocating for a peace agreement? The Koreans say, we want a peace agreement to end the Korean War. And I just remember this silence on that conference call, and Joe saying, you're absolutely right, Christine. That is going to be a key step towards achieving denuclearization. So I think, we've been annoying and biting at the ankles and heels, but we have definitely changed the conversation. And so while we still have a long way to go to end the Korean War at a time when we are facing compounding global crises of militarism, climate change, rising authoritarianism, and of course we are seeing deepening inequality, especially with the oligarchs now in power with Trump, I am reminded that the work to build peace, the actual process, yields the outcomes that we desire. So I want to end with 5 insights that I have gleaned from my plus 30 years as a peace activist that I hope you will embrace as we collectively work to build a more just and peaceful world. 1, remember that peace doesn't just happen. As trailblazers like Reverend Rhee have demonstrated, it takes hard work, courage, and perseverance. But remember, history has shown us that peace and diplomacy work. During periods of engagement by government and civil society with adversaries like China, Russia, and North Korea, without fail, we've witnessed the greatest possibility for peace and democratic openings. The inverse is also true. During times of military escalation and provocation, there are greater chances for accidental or intentional conflict and even greater repression. Even this report by CSIS, it's a conservative think tank in Washington, D.C., they found that, quote, periods of negotiation between the U.S. and North Korea in a bilateral or multilateral format appear to have some correlation with a decrease in the number of North Korean provocations. I mean, you need a think tank to actually say that. We all know that, but it's good to have CSIS say this. 2, we need greater democratization of the process to shape foreign policy, including the participation of those historically excluded and most impacted. And that means women, civil society, people of color, the diaspora. How many of us are from countries that have been impacted by war, and many that the US have been involved in? So studies have shown that when women are involved in peace processes, an agreement is more likely to be reached and to last. 3, we need new thinking about what makes us secure. We live in a time where systems designed to maintain peace and security have instead fostered conflict, perpetuated violence, and destabilized communities worldwide. Our lives are dominated by a paradigm that assumes our security requires more deterrence and more militarization, which is premised on the belief that conflict can only be resolved with military force. Ask anyone living in an over-policed neighborhood, and they can attest that guns do not make them safer, but what does is strong community ties, economic security, clean air and water, access to food, and protection from natural disasters, as we're watching the fires engulf Los Angeles. We must view deterrence not as a defense mechanism, but as a process of militarization, which not only triggers our adversaries to further militarize, but has devastating consequences to life, our planet, and democracy. Instead of fear, we must start from the vision of the world we want. 4, as we are witnessing in South Korea, the people taking to the streets to defend their democracy and preventing the next war, we must also build political power. The grassroots movements that ended the US war on Vietnam and apartheid in South Korea didn't see change overnight. It was the product of sustained organizing, strategic alliances, and deep moral clarity that many in the faith communities provide. And we have witnessed the largest anti-war demonstrations in the US for Palestine since the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, including the most widespread student protests. And of course, right now, South Korea is a shining light of pro-democracy movements, from the democratic uprisings for Gwangju to the Candlelight Revolution to now their victory in ousting President Yoon. And in the US, the most powerful military in the world, with 800 bases worldwide and an annual military budget of $1 trillion, which is more than the next 10 countries combined, we are at a historic turning point. In poll after poll, Americans are war weary, and younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, they are less supportive of military approaches to foreign policy challenges. They want a decrease in Pentagon spending, and they are less concerned with threats posed by Russia and China. In summary, they are less invested in a belief system of American exceptionalism and want an alternative to more militarization and war. Last but not least, working for peace actually builds the crucial skills, and as you all know who teach it, that are desperately needed to solve our world's problems: listening, understanding, empathy, compassion, cooperation. And when we interact with those considered our enemy and understand the conflict from their perspective, we've begun the process to achieve the outcomes we want: decreased tensions, increased understanding, relationships built on trust, and greater democracy. The alternative to more militarization is a richer, more empathetic, and peaceful world. Isn't that what we all want? I would like to end with the words of someone who embodies the paradigm shift our world desperately needs now to challenge the militarized vision of security. This is Kim Ji-tae, and I told you about that time in 2006. I went to South Korea, to Pyeongtaek, when the farmers were resisting the seizure of their land and for the expansion of the military base. So it was at this hearing with the defense ministry, the South Korean defense ministry, on the expansion of Camp Humphreys. And Kim Ji-tae, who was elected the village leader, he stood up, and they asked him, "What is the price of your land?" And he responded this way: "The price will be unimaginably high. The price must include every grain of rice grown and harvested here. It must include all of our efforts to grow them, as well as our whole life here, including our sighs, our tears, and our laughter. The price must include the stars, which have witnessed our grief and joy, and the wind, which has dried our tears. If all of these could be added, I would tell you the price." So thank you. Thank you for believing we can build a better world for all of us, built on peace, justice, ecological sustainability. We have no choice. The future depends on all of us. Thank you. I think we have a whole hour, so James.
That time where we can bring out questions, suggestions, ideas, just continue the conversation, and we got 58 more minutes to do that.
Wow, that's a long
Let's do
time.
that, okay? Yeah, thank you. And here is the microphone. Who want to go first? I'll be running around the microphone.
There's some extraordinary leaders in this room.
That's
Yeah.
My spiritual teacher informed me that you didn't have to tell people or proselytize to get people to get rid of the rotary phone. Somebody did this. You didn't have to talk, and then you have to proselytize and get people to get up the horse and buggy and move forward and get into argument. And it was a guy about 2,000 years ago that said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you. We are body, spirit, and soul." And the gentleman that preached today talked about the division in the church, where we need to help. And this guy 2,000 years ago said, "Stop living out of your carnal mind and your spiritual mind, because you're being double-minded. Become a spiritual initiate." And just like the cell phone reached a critical mass to tip the scale, the car reached a critical mass to tip the scale. The spiritual initiates came from living in a cave, and the critical mass became walking upright. And then the critical mass became becoming conscious. And now the critical mass is to become Christ conscious. We have to stop living double-minded, pretending that we love the Lord, with one foot in each word. And so when you feel like being spiritual, you're spiritual. When you feel like cussing me out, you cuss me out. Until the critical mass reaches spiritual consciousness, those that are carnally minded, that own the military, that want more money, that want to keep pushing that agenda, you can't stop. When the critical mass reaches spiritual consciousness, the lion will lay down with the lamb. That was his message. And we got to get on it and stop playing religion. And the Roman Empire turned this spiritual teaching into a world of rituals. It ain't about rituals. It's about transformation. Become a spiritual initiate and understand what the man 2,000 years ago was actually teaching. That's my solution.
Thanks.
I really appreciate sharing your story. Although I'm feeling like I'm the sandwich generation. What I mean is the Syngman and the older generation who initiate this dialogue in the 70s, 80s. That generation have a direct connection with North Korea. Many of them have family there. And I am kind of second generation. My father is from Pyongyang and a friend of the Syngman. Now I am here. I see there's some disconnection from the older generation and then young generation, how we convey. Of course, the condition is changing, the political condition and all the other things is changing, rapidly changing. But my question is how we can continue the vision we have a memorial for peace forum here, and then talk about sharing our experience with the Dr. Rhee is one of the ways seeking how to convey that tradition legacy in a new way to the new generation. So I'm very hopeful of what the young people are involving, but still, when I talk to many young people in different countries, different generations, I feel like the connection is almost lost. And then the first generation did a great job, but they are passed away rapidly. We kind of lost that memory very rapidly. So I just want to ask, it is maybe not perfect answer from you. I don't expect that in your experience, how we can continue that peace and reconciliation effort throughout the generation. How we can, I mean, I'm now almost 60, and then I talk to my daughter, and their interest is a little different, but sometimes it's surprising how they conceive all these issues in different angle. So I know I have to listen, but before I retire, before we become an older generation again, what is our role? I mean, everybody's role to continue this effort. I just ask you your opinion, your idea.
Thank you so much, Reverend John. When I was kind of reading through a lot of old emails in preparation for this gathering from Reverend Syngman Rhee, I Googled in my inbox, and there were so many email exchanges with him. And actually, I think that, I feel so honored that I think James was the person that told me, no, they want you to speak. And I said, but why me? I had a relationship with him, but there were so many other more knowledgeable and capable people, especially, in the faith community that could be more inspiring. But I think that I think that intergenerational learning is so important. I mean, I can't underscore that. I mean, my learning from people like Reverend Rhee, even Reverend Kilsong Yoon, you know, who has been a little bit challenging, and even Dr. Kim Joo, who we lost last fall. But their stories, their own overcoming of their mistrust, their hatred. I mean, of course, Reverend Rhee's father died in a prison in North Korea. For what, right? And I just, and for him to overcome that hatred and to have it converted into love, into empathy, into compassion, into understanding, I think that that is so profound. And I think that we, before it's too late, we really must revive that. I mean, I took it upon myself to reach out and to learn from him, and he received me with such grace and generosity. But I think we need to do that because I agree with you, there is a huge gap between that first generation and that I think we could learn so much from and the younger generation. And I love that you said, you know, you talked to your daughter, but she has a different take on it. And I think the younger generation today, they, even though they didn't experience the war, and even though they didn't experience necessarily the migration, a lot of them, my new successor at Women Cross DMZ, Kathy, she's in her 30s. She was born here, you know, but she feels the generational trauma of the war. And she sees the way, and I think that this generation sees the way in which that kind of, that inability, we the Korean people have not formally ended the war. We have not completed it. And so we have not had the chance to reconcile, to visit. You know, I even learned recently that my mother's grandfather was a governor in South Pyongyang, in Nampo, Jinnampo. How many times have I been to Nampo? I had no idea because my mother hid that. Because you can imagine, the people that lived in the South, they didn't want to say anything that their family was from the North, right? Because we know the experience. And so I just think that there's new interest, and I think there's new energy, and I think in times of crisis, there's also times of opportunity. And I think this Trump administration, and in many ways, he's a snake oil man, you know? And we saw the way that he handled the last opportunities. And in fact, I think in many ways, he did more damage because of the travel ban. Think about the people-to-people engagement that we were able to do before 2017 when he imposed that ban. Because the experience of one young white man and how many thousands of Koreans and their families could not go to see their family as a result of the one bad action, an unfortunate tragedy. So I think that this is a moment, and we know that the Trump administration, Trump, he himself, even though if it's true or not, we have to hold them to their promise to end America's forever wars. And Dan Leaf, he's in conversation with the transition team. And he knows I'm skeptical, but he said, you hold them to their word. And so I think that I think it's really important to gather. And I was telling Reverend Martin on our way here that this is really, especially the Korean pastors in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, think about how difficult that was, how much adversity, red baiting that you guys experienced. And I think that there's tremendous strength to be actually learned from that experience. And that despite that, I mean, going back to MLK Jr., I mean, that spiritual conviction, that is very powerful. And I think that we have to create some kind of learning circles where we could share the stories, because there is so much interest and so much desire to know. And you know, this younger generation has not had the opportunity to travel to North Korea. And I think we have to work together to break down that wall, and especially the wall of the travel ban that Trump has put into power. Yes. Oh gosh, lots of hands. But you first, I see you. Hi. Hi, Kat.
First, I'd like to thank all of you for being so generous with your stories. I was sitting in the back frantically taking notes as best I could. But thank you for sharing part of your experience with me. I work with children, and I was especially struck by the concise but very descriptive biography you gave us of Dr. Rhee, who I only knew as the moderator of the Presbyterian Church, but because I was serving in Appalachia, I benefited from his understanding that the USA is a mission field too. And I'm sure he was a proponent of the Children's Mission Yearbook, which used to come out. And it was basically my curriculum, because we couldn't afford curriculum. And so I would really appreciate if you're welcome to sharing your little bio that you wrote, because I would like to use that as a story with my children when I'm telling them about peacekeeping. Because we have to give them the vocabulary and pictures of people who have done it so they know they can do it.
Yes.
Because I want to raise, the next group of troublemakers.
Yay! Absolutely, Kat. I'll email it to you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I pastor of a Korean church in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, wow.
Until I met Korean refugee families in my congregation, I have a lot of misunderstanding and distortions. In my congregation, we have 3 families from North Korea.
Wow.
And so you just stressed out and mentioned that the peace agreement. But in many Korean conservative Christians and churches, and there's a lot of misunderstandings, distortions. That if we stress out that the peace agreement, you are just following the North Korean propaganda, and you just right. So I think that there's huge misunderstanding of the distortions. So is there any way that your recommendation to improve and to change the thought, especially for the right side of the Korean churches?
Oh, gosh. That has been giving me a lot of gray hairs in the last 20 years of my life. You nailed it. It's really difficult because oftentimes the defectors, when they come on their journey, a lot of them start, right, in South Korea. They go through the Hanawons, the kind of conversion, and they're taught a certain narrative. And then, I think a lot of the conservative churches are there to receive them. And then they go through a kind of, I don't want to say brainwashing, but it is a little bit of that, right? And so I can only share my experience of engaging with defectors that have been kind of trained with that thought. And so there was a moment when I was at Columbia University, and Charles Armstrong invited me to come to talk about my experience crossing the DMZ. And Columbia has actually they have funded a number of North Korean defectors to be students there. And so I kind of knew it could be an interesting classroom and conversation. And so I told my story, and and in fact, I just found this email of, it was on that trip, I had to prepare for this show on the Samantha Bee Show. It's a comedy show on cable TV. And they had just asked me this question, and they're trying to be funny, but it's kind of disrespectful, but they said, well, why are the, something about the Kims, like why are they such a shitty country or something? I mean, just sorry, excuse me, but they were trying to be funny, and I said, well, I guess if you think about the most militarized country in the world, where 1 in 4 children go to bed hungry, where there's systematic discrimination against one set of people, where it's the largest prison population, and we have mass surveillance of all of our people's communications, then I think we should be asking that very same question of our government, right? And I think that was that moment when the speech writers or the joke writers, they said, drop the mics. Christine dropped all the mics because they thought that I was talking about North Korea. They didn't realize that I was talking about the United States, because it is our country, and that is not North Korea, it is the United States. So I think that's one way to actually break down that narrative. And it's not to say that North Korea isn't this incredibly repressive place, but when I got into it with a North Korean defector, he stood up in the, I mean, I've had so many instances where, you know, whether they're real or not, they will say, I'm from North Korea and you're full of shit. And I would say, okay, let's talk about it. And I remember I got into this heated exchange with the young North Korean defector. And he said, that's not true. We don't, you know, peace agreement, you're only protecting Kim Jong-un and da-da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, then you tell me, what is the alternative plan? Should we have the regime change? What would that mean? Let's think about it. How has that played out? How has that played out in Iraq? How has that played out in Libya? How has that even ever played out and actually succeeded? And is that what you want for your family? Is there another way? Let's think about it. Is there another way? What hasn't been tried? Peace. It actually has not been tried. And I could see the wheels churning in his head. And I don't know, but I think that that's a really, when you get down to it, what is the path then? And if you can show me another path, because the path of isolating them, of doing military provocation, of more sanctions that just harm. And yesterday I shared that interview clip with Jimmy Carter, where he said, meanwhile we have been vilifying them, and we have been responsible for their economy. And while bolstering the economy of South Korea, it's the greatest contradiction and hypocrisy. And so I think the best we can do is try to give a more critical history and truth, to engage, like you said, Reverend Chung, with the generations that have engaged with North Korean people, and to try to present an alternative perspective. But I have to say that there is, it's really difficult. And I think that very conservative tradition we're seeing right now in South Korea, right? And I have to say that, you know, personally, part of my decision to step down from Women Cross DMZ is, you know, I have been afraid for my life, you know? When we organized a huge gathering in Washington, D.C. in 2023 for the anniversary of the Armistice Agreement, we brought 500 people from across the country. It was so inspiring. We did all these amazing events, congressional briefing, to peace march, to, I even went to the White House to meet Kirk Campbell, the Biden's Deputy Secretary of State. And, you know, that is a very well organized and financed opposition to our peace efforts. And they placed an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling me the leader of a phony peace movement. They did a hit piece on me in Newsweek. I mean, there's only so much that you can take, I think. And I returned home to Honolulu, and in my newspaper, the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, there was a full-page ad in the Sunday paper attacking the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. And then in the advertisement, it said, people like pro-North Korean individuals like Christine Ahn that are trying to brainwash the people of Aloha. You know, I feel like Hawaii is such a small place, and my neighborhood, and for people to read that and to think that I'm a pro North Korean and a communist, I mean, that for me felt like, this is crazy. In 2024, 2023, we're still doing this. And you know who I found out who paid for that ad? Her name is Annie Chan, and she's an oligarch. She's Korean. Even though Chan, she married a Chinese American guy who became a wealthy semiconductor chip maker. And she has been financing all these groups, One Korea Network, that are funding right-wing narratives and defectors, and it is scary. And then I just got contacted by the news agency, News Tapa in South Korea, and they said that Annie Chan hosted Yoon Suk-yeol's wife in Hawaii, and that I believe that she's the reason why I was banned from South Korea. And she has been financing all the right-wing groups, politicians in South Korea. And that whole thing you see, Stop the Steal, and all that kind of stuff that you saw in the right-wing protests. So we have to wake up also to the incredible, well-organized right-wing network. And I think that that's really why I'm here also, to be with you guys, because you are the truth tellers, you are the justice and peace lovers, and that we need to unite. You need to strengthen the power within the Korean Christian faith community, but we need to build bridges with other civil society groups, because we can't stay in our silos. We really must unite and work together across. So I feel you, and I'm here to help you in any way, to support you with educational materials or even an opportunity. But who is the pastor from Michigan? Let me see. Oh yeah, hi, yes. So Cassie Kim is the defector that I met in Lansing, Michigan, and she knows the critical view. And I think this is where we also need the defectors that are pro-peace, that actually understand this perspective, to join with us, you know? And that's where I think we have to also be willing to, I know that the North Koreans, they don't like it, they see them as traitors, but if we have to build peace with everybody that wants peace. And they are that next generation. And actually, lastly, I think that they are the new generation of separated families. And I think that continuing a state of war is not going to ever help them return to visit their hometown. You know, and I think that's a really powerful argument, because, or even to prevent annihilation of their families in North Korea. Okay, over here. Sorry, and I will stop talking so much. Okay.
So my first career was as a newspaper journalist. And at the very beginning of my career, I confronted Senator John Glenn from a coal-producing state who was raining down acid rain on New York State. So yesterday, you mentioned climate change as a significant issue for the Koreas. So I'm wondering how you will engage that issue, as well as framing it within the concept of creation care.
Wow. Well, Yvette, do you want to talk about creation care?
So creation care is how local communities look at their communities and environment and come up with creative ways for people to participate in their congregations. So my own congregation right now is considering a community garden where both immigrants and refugees, as well as members of the congregation, can come together and farm the land so that people in need can get food in the deserts. So during the COVID situation, it was an
since you answered your question, or the latter part, but you know, I actually think that climate change and working cooperatively towards climate change is a really important peace-building step that we should explore as a peace-building community. And why I say that is I became interested in North Korea actually because of the famine. And many people don't realize that North Korea was the canary in the coal mine for climate change. That actually, in the 1990s, a confluence of events took place that made North Korea incredibly susceptible to climate change. There was, first of all, the economic aspect of it. When the former Soviet Union disintegrated, that was a huge trading bloc for North Korea. They exchanged, they bartered, and even with China at the time, but then that all switched into a cash economy. And in fact, the Soviet Union had provided so much cheap subsidized oil to North Korea, which that petroleum they used to build a very industrialized farming system, and you know, irrigation systems, to even the fertilizer was petroleum based. And so when that stopped that kind of industrialized agricultural system. So similarly, Cuba and North Korea were in a similar crisis. And North Korea continued on that path of trying to maintain that industrial agricultural system. And Cuba turned actually organic into a more sustainable farming system. So that was one, was the disintegration of the trading system. The other one was because of there being sanctions and being isolated, they deforested so much of their land for heating, right? And so so when there were like massive flooding and then droughts, they had deforested so much of their land that it led to massive landslides in North Korea. So I think in many ways, an opportunity, even though North Korea has been struggling and they are in need of a lot of humanitarian aid, I think that there could be a joint learning where actually we can learn from North Korea how they've built resilient systems in the face of climate change. And I know that they tried to get a grant from, I think it was the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. But of course, who blocked their ability to get that grant was the US. And so, but I do think that we have to, whether it's China, whether it's North Korea, that climate cooperation is going to be a very important way and angle for our countries, our adversaries, to try to work together, because climate knows no boundaries. Natural disasters know no boundaries. And the more that they happen, the more we see massive global migration. And so we have to, as a global community, figure out. But I do think that climate cooperation, I'm waiting for my genius one day to wake up with a dream about how to do that. But I do believe in my heart that climate cooperation with North Korea is an important step. It's very tangible, and it's what we all need together. You have a question. And thank you for being so, I feel like I'll look out and look over you and you're very like affirming. So thank you, Chris. Yeah.
I was really struck by what you said earlier in the talk when you talked about North Koreans and sort of like fear of, what we saw with the U.S. did to Libya and Iraq. And even what you're just saying now, it made me think about, and my question is simply like how optimistic you are about reunification's ability to self-determine if so many outside large powers like the U.S. having bases and so China and relationship with North Korea, like how optimistic are you that the Korean Peninsula will be able to self-determine its reunification and not have these large, massively influential powers determining the whole game?
Oh gosh, Chris, that's the question of the multiple centuries. I mean, I would say that that's why we need to get to peace. because that is a huge obstacle for the two Koreas to even be able to have a conversation about whether to reunify or not, you know? And in 2000, the first meeting of the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, and Kim Dae-jung, they signed the June 15th joint declaration where they said, okay, we will begin the process of reunification. We'll do it through families. We'll do it through civil society exchanges. We'll do it through business. We set up, they set up the joint economic zones in Kaesong and other places. But we will let the future decide what kind of reunified political system we will have. And I think that you need peace to be able to start those conversations, to actually begin that process. And I think, my gosh, we've lost an entire generation. Over 2 million South Koreans visited North Korea during that Sunshine Policy era. I know, and I think, my gosh, we've gone so back in time. And so I do think that if we can get to peace and we can try to end the Korean War and begin the process to normalize relations, that then creates the conditions for the two Koreas and the Korean people to decide. Because at the end of the day, Koreans are Koreans, you know? And I think, I often think, you know, when I've been doing this for a long time, but I remember South Koreans would say to me, especially young people, well, we don't want to reunify. Because we look at Germany, and we look at the situation between East and West Germany. And the East Germans, you know, the West Germans had to pay for East Germany to catch up, and it cost us so much. And then, but look at that country now, right? And I think, you know, I think you need to frame it the other way, I would say to them. Look at the cost of investing in preparation for war, and what does that do? And how does that create the conditions? What if we actually instead invested that in peace, in understanding, in development? What a different future that could be. And yeah, I don't know, but I think that absolutely, you're right, that, you know, for the future of the Koreas. But I mean, ultimately, the US needs to get out of Korea. And I think even though I'm not a proponent of MAGA, I think that, you know, maybe we spin it. Make America great again. We need to invest in the things that make a good and just society at home. And we cannot continue to keep funding 800 bases around the world with the $1 trillion Pentagon budget, right? And I think for people in this country that we need to, that's been, you know, when I started to meet with the Biden transition team, I remember the guy who then became the communications, you know, the Secretary of Communications for the White House, Ned Price. And he had said to me, well, what we did well during the Obama administration was we listened to a lot of civil society groups about domestic issues. What we didn't do was on foreign policy. And that was my hope, that they would do that. And I'm not sure we'll get a lot of success, but we need to be building the building blocks right now to be building a more well-organized, political, and strategic movement, grassroots people movement to transform US foreign policy. We have to democratize that process because it's not just about our ability to build a good society and democracy at home, but think about how much US militarized foreign policy impacts all of our communities, all of our families around the world. We play that dual role, and we can do so much to change the world, I think. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Oh my gosh, okay. Hi.
Hi, Christine.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have two questions. Quick, we can elaborate.
Okay, thank you.
One is symbolic, other one is practical.
Mm-hmm.
The symbolic one is I believe, kind of symbolic action gave us kind of memory when we go back again and again. So when you and Gloria Steinem and other two Nobel laureates with other, a lot of about 30 women crossed the DMZ.
Yes.
Right, that was about 10 years ago.
Yes.
So it's not going to have a 10-year anniversary in May 24th. Okay, and then I was wondering, in 2018, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un crossed the demarcation line together, like a crossing the DMZ, like kind of the same concept. Probably copycat or your symbolic action. What I'm saying is, no, why not we have to every year crossing the DMZ again?
Why not try to cross the DMZ?
Is, people are one is enough. We show some symbolic action. We already spread the message. That's it. People remember that as a past. It's not ongoing thing.
Right.
So 10-year mark, we get together, remembering Syngman did. 10-year mark, we want to get together. We did 10 years ago, kind of stuff. So, what is next symbolic action you have in mind, or you already retired from that group? And then the second question is more practical. Korea Peace Now, and that it reminds me of my involvement in the hunger movement, Stop Hunger Now. Both catchphrase has an urgency there.
Right.
Stop Hunger Now. They help us to visualize as well as doing some practical things. So we gather together MLK Day, National Day of National Service. We do meal packaging. So we can invite my congregation members and communities, all people, all ages. We do the things together annually. So that gives us some kind of thinking about the slogan. So Korea Peace Now, at least once a year, if we do something, can you suggest something more practical or tangible we can do as a congregation, as we're inviting people around us, not necessarily Korean, also other people? So that's my question about how we mobilize not only women and other people together to end the war.
Thank you. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that, this year marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's division by Cold War powers. And I don't know how, in order to cross the DMZ, you have to have engagement with the North Koreans. And right now, there has been an internal battle within the DPRK about whether they should invest any of their time and energy engaging with the West. And so there was an intense political battle, and I think that who has temporarily won is the pro-Russia side, right? And so even though Trump says, I'm ready to meet with Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-un says, you disgraced me, and we can't trust the Americans. So I feel like I'm not sure which piece of the puzzle will have to go first. Do we have to mobilize, especially those of us in the US, to put pressure to try to change our government's orientation to the DPRK, to abandon its failed approach? Do we, as a global movement of peace-loving people, figure out some way to meet with the North Korean people? I don't know, really, and I'm just being honest here. I'm not sure what the next action will be, but I do, it's been difficult because we know that the North Koreans are struggling. We know that they have had difficult harvests. We know that the pandemic has made it more difficult to have trade with China. And so there's a part of me that thinks, is there a humanitarian aid action that we could do together? Something that is simple and practical, that each of the congregations could do to raise some resources. But then we face the North Koreans that say, we're fine. We don't need your help, And so this is where, again, Reverend Chung, who are the Korean American leaders and the pastors that have established really deep trust with the North Koreans. You know, who are they right now? I don't know. And I think it's important to have them try to be the bridge. Because even though we've had, Ayoung and I have had, you know, we have been the few Korean Americans that have been able to go to the UN mission. So it's not going so great right now. And so I think that we're going to need those Korean American pastors who have established those ties to be the emissary on behalf of our movement. But I think it's small steps that we can take now to be trying to, even gathering today, that's the first step in reviving a Korea peace movement that has really, I think, been impacted by the pandemic, been impacted by Yoon Suk-yeol, right? His election. And obviously the kind of hangover from the period of the summits. But it's going to be, something as we know with Trump, something is going to open. And so we need to be ready, I think, to be mobilized. I see, Reverend Chung, you have some ideas.
Just a comment to some of the questions.
Yes.
Actually, many people didn't realize that this is the PGUSA seminar, so including the PGUSA, Disciple, UCC, United Methodist Church, United Church of Christ, and United Church of Canada. We all passed a resolution from 1996 to present day. Resolution to observe the Peace Sunday for Korea. You may know. So every year, the second Sunday of August, just before the August 15th regulation, yes. Every denomination, mainline denomination, I mentioned 5 of them, UCC, Disciple, PGSA, UMC, and the UCL, United Church of Canada. We passed the resolution. So the KNCC in Korea, National Council of Church in Korea, and the Korean Christian Federation, now we lost that connection last few years, provide the prayer and then content of worship, and then provide everybody. Like the denomination to that, and the problem is local congregation didn't use it. So there's some resources, there's some mandate, if you are a member of that church group, mandate to promote peace and reconciliation as a Sunday worship service. But only few, I think, less than maybe few percent of that is actually doing it. So to let local pastors, not only the Korean pastors, but all the other congregation, observe and then follow the General Assembly's resolution to promote peace and reconciliation. So small pieces out there, but issue is how we can actually take initiative and then doing it. I have in Korea last year is the 100th anniversary of the National Council of Churches. And then during that meeting, we have a Korean forum that was organized by the World Council of Churches. And we used to have a meeting with the Korean Christian Federation of Korea, the KSCC, and we usually gathered the Geneva or something. But that was informal session. The reason is if he's the official, if you're the official, the delegation from North Korea and South Korea should be there. But last whole year, we didn't have any correspondent from the North Korean Christians. So, first service, the good news is in few months, last few months, there's some connection and some communication, indirect communication through KSCC and then some of the NGO here. Basically, they are helping many see, but it's very selective, very selective. So we have been doing this one for 40 years, many of them engaged in this movement. We feel the ups and downs so many times, so frustrated. It seems like there's no hope there. Suddenly some little light is coming up. We are very excited. So even though, as Kristen said, this is a really difficult time right now, it is tough with all the political condition and what's going on. But we should not lose our hope. We continue. Persistent resilience is the word I think of. It is not something we can do right away and easy solution. It's not. So there is not a practical answer, but
practically, we have a peace Sunday. So.
Yeah. So this Sunday, the second week of August, we have to work on that. And the material is always provided by the National Council of Church in Korea, and then translated even in English. So you can use not whole worship service, but maybe a short prayer with not only the Korean congregation, but all other East congregation.
But you know what, Reverend Chung, this and Reverend Lee, I think that this is the 80th anniversary of Korea's division, and who played the role was the U.S. So I actually think that this year we should try to do something collectively together. The faith, the civil society, the women, the youth, the divided families, the Korean War veterans. I mean, you know, I think that this is, you know, whether it's some dramatic action at the DMZ or not, or even something in Washington, D.C., we should do something together to mark this tragic anniversary.
Thank you. And I want to comment that he actually sent me the prayer. Because we're friends. And we didn't use it in our sanctuary. And actually, I read part in Korean just for the flavor. And then one of the elders read. And it was in English, and it was very powerful. And so, you know, our network, that's what we are doing here. But I'm a visual artist, and today when Kim, pastor, preached in the last chapel, he said that peace is synonymous with the gospel, the good news. Jesus said, peace. And because I'm a visual learner and also a visual artist, when I think of peace, I have to come up with an image. But the only problem is peace is not an image, it's a process. It's a life, the way you live. And so you can't really put it into one symbol. However, I use the phrase in doing liturgical art and different kinds of creative work. Whenever I do design or painting, sculpture, installation, or even worship, I use a phrase the phrase that's kind of radical is shaping shalom. So because shalom is peace in English, but in Hebrew and for Jewish people it is so much more. So our limited understanding of peace and putting it into the gospel. But the image speaks and expresses so much, just like poetry, just like dance, just like music. But my question to you is, whenever I do artwork and ministry and preach, I imagine myself shaping shalom. Because I imagine Jesus saying, not peace, but shalom. And whatever that means, the depth and width and height, I imagine that, and then that's whatever I create, whatever I share, that's what I'm doing as a peacemaker. I'm shaping shalom. It's because words are limited, but the way you put it together really creates a different image and shines a new light into it. Is there an image? So actually, before I ask you that, I want to ask, do you have an image of shaping shalom, peace, or the way you open the gospel? And I was looking at the table cover you brought, drapery. And what's incredible is that you have 6 patterns, but it creates so many more patterns than two because they are diverse. And this to me is a visual shalom, right? So you see how I'm visualizing it. Do you have a way you visualize shalom or peace?
I don't know. I think that's. I know, but you know what? Well, I mean, I think that the image right now, because of what's happening in the world, is the light, is the candlelight. For some reason, I feel like the light in a time of darkness, and that there's something about the light. And I forgot who asked the question yesterday about the role of the young women in the South Korean protests. Oh yeah, I mean, I think that there's something there about the light that I keep getting drawn to, about the candlelight. But do you know the story of this scarf? I feel like I have to tell you the story. As an artist, you would love this.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is the scarf we wore when we crossed the DMZ. And so when we were thinking about where we're going to cross the DMZ, what are we going to wear? I mean, I know that sounds very shallow, but you know, we're women, we like to look nice, and we're going to be on the global stage. And so we were going to wear white for peace, right? But something more hopeful and bright, right? Because this is about the future. We're walking for the future. And so we had this idea. So I got the idea of trying to create a scarf. It's actually the pastors do this, right? They wear the stoles, right? So I thought, well, what if we did a stole made out of toguri fabric? You know, when children turn 1, they wear the toguri, right? Sekdong, right? They wear the sekdong. And so I said, we're going to make the sekdong stoles, and but then that was really impossible. But I brought from Pyongyang. I asked them, we're going to try to do something with the sekdong, with the toguri fabric. So this is the stripes from Pyongyang. Yes, exactly. We're thinking about doing something like that. So we'll use the toguri fabric from North Korea, so the stripes. I brought a huge ream, and I went back to Hawaii, and I mailed it to Seoul, to Mimihan. And then they paired it with the toguri fabric from South Korea. And so this is the W, which is the logo of Women Cross DMZ, but women. And you know who designed this logo is a Korean-American designer. Her name is Colleen Beck. She was with us when we crossed the DMZ. But she was a designer at Twitter before it was X. And so she came up with this logo that it was the barbed wire fence is, in some ways, it's the W. And so, you know, when Koreans, they go manse, that, yeah, but it's also like the top part of the hanbok or the chosunbok. So this is, it's that. It's about women and people transgressing the boundaries, the militarized boundaries that keep us apart. And so this is the story, because we thought the toguri is worn when children turn 1 because it represents hope, future, prosperity. And so I think that that's exactly like your whole.
It's also that whole tradition of the colors, you know, bring the spirit, capturing.
And these are the Korean, these are Korean colors, right? Yeah. So thank you for always remembering about the importance of art and creativity as part of our work in doing the peace building work. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
How or what would you recommend to American politicians who are mostly thinking about dealing with immediate situations, like an invasion of country, like Russia, Ukraine, and Syria, or when there is a vacuum, someone else take over. And it always happens. And, you know, and I myself as an American, don't want our values to be replaced by Chinese, for example, or someone else. How would you say from the Christian point of view to the politicians, why don't you do this in that immediate situation?
I mean, I think what you're saying is that even though we don't want war with these adversaries, China, Russia, or North Korea, and also at the same time, we don't want to have our democracy and liberation. We don't want to be similar to those systems, to those countries, to those kind of non-democratic countries. Is that right? And so how do we convince the politicians to do what is the right path? And I think that even though we are a democracy in this country, I think that there are plenty of people that recognize that democracy isn't fully alive in this country, that it isn't practiced to the depth, to the strength, to the resilience that it can be, when democracy just means going to the polls, and we have such low voter turnout in this country. So I think that's a challenge for those of us that want peace, but don't, you know, I think that the way that the conflict or the narrative that is shaped about China or Russia and North Korea, I'm not trying to diminish the reality of these authoritarian states. They are. And I don't think that those of us living in democratic countries want those kinds of systems. But I think that the more we allow those hawks that want to maintain a strong military apparatus to prevent or to try to defeat those countries, the more we lose our democracy, the more we lose our sense of what this country can be. And I think that, what we're witnessing even in South Korea, that here is a clear example of a quote-unquote democratic leader, Yoon Suk-yeol, who desecrated democracy by imposing martial law and using these kind of Cold War tropes about his political opponents. And what has the US done? The US has seen South Korea as its critical ally in its effort to contain China. But yet, the hypocrisy of not condemning what Yoon did to South Korea really undermines, I think, the power and possibility of democracy in this country. And so I think that the more we allow that kind of path of more militarization cloaked in the term deterrence, we need to flip the script. It's not peace through strength, it's strength through peace. And I think that's what we all know is the right way, is the just way. And so we have to work to be building that kind of political will in this country and around the world. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you each of your leader, wherever you are in your own network. We'll continue dreaming, of course. There is a panel discussion at 4:45 and now a photo session. And there are we have not done well to include them right here. They are commenting, they are responding, they are asking questions. They deserve to be active, but I'll find out about comments they are making so that they are part of the conversation. Okay? And for now, let's move to Warsaw for the picture taking and come back to 4:45 panel discussion on the documentary process.
We're your jacket, and we are heading to the front of God's hall, not chapel. So there are some of those staircases that we're going to have a nice throughput. And we're going to have some Lansky and some other staff will join. So please, thank you. And I have a couple of resources shared by the live streaming attendees that I will share tomorrow. Thank you.